Okay.
Welcome to another edition of Throwing Down Heavy Light. My name is Jamal Binding. I'm the chair of the board of More Movement Omaha for Race Equity. And we have Sheritha Jones, who is a native of Omaha. And I had a chance to talk to her about her wonderful editorial that she wrote in the Omaha World Herald about Malcolm X. This is an issue that's coming up with the Nebraska Hall of Fame folks in the next week or so. And she rose through the ranks of Omaha World Herald. And now she's the chief librarian in the paper. I'd like to have her explain that a little bit more, what that means. She is also a graduate of Central High School. We're both graduate of Central, different years, and we want to discuss the importance of the article and some of the things that she's involved in helping improve the community. So, Mrs. Jones, can you start with that? Share a little bit more with the listening audience, Sheritha, and kind of go from there.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Sheritha Jones. I was born and raised in Omaha. I've lived here my whole life. I graduated from Central High School. I was always in OPS. Went to Conestoga, Catlin, Beveridge, and then Central High School. I graduated from UNO. I've worked at the World Herald for 27 years.
Wow.
In various capacities. I started out when I was in school at the lobby counter at the World Herald, which they no longer have a lobby counter anymore. But that was in the 90s. I was a lovely lady of the lobby, as we called ourselves. I then moved up to the newsroom. One of my journalism teachers was the managing editor at the newsroom at the time. His name was Jeff Gauger. And he liked my writing, but he was actually looking to fill like an office manager position in the newsroom. So he thought, hey, one of these students, she writes pretty good, which had nothing to do with the job at all. You had to make sure the mail was delivered and faxes were delivered and phones were answered and things like that. But he said he liked my writing. He had someone leaving. Would I be interested in coming up to the newsroom? And so I said yes. And then I did that for a little while. Then I moved into the library as the photo librarian and then the assistant librarian and now the chief librarian. The trick about being the chief librarian now is when I first got into the library, there were maybe 8 of us. And now I am the chief librarian and I am the library. So I am in charge of myself, the library. I do research for the newsroom, reporters as they need it. I archive the paper, or I did archive the paper. What else? I sit on
When you use the word
editorial.
archivist, what does that mean? Does that mean like you go back and you look at historical data in the newspaper or articles? How far back do you guys go?
Well, I do that. We have our paper started in 1883.
Oh, so
So
you
I
got an
can look
article.
at
Okay, 1883. Okay.
we have a historical database where we can look at very old stuff from 1883. Then our current electronic database is from 1983 until the present. Prior to 83, you have to look at microfiche or microfilm or go to the historical archive, but the older the papers are on the historical archive, it's kind of hard to find because the print type was much smaller back then. Stuff gets jumbled together, so it's a little harder to find. But 1883 is how far we go back.
One of the reasons that I invited you on to talk about your article that you wrote about Malcolm X, and you shared a little bit more about growing up and so on. We were very much impressed with the article and the importance of putting Malcolm X in the Nebraska Hall of Fame. Can you please outline, I know your article did a great job, outline it kind of succinctly, why is this important, particularly for African Americans and other people of color in the state? Why is this a significant issue for us from your vantage point?
From my vantage point, it is significant. Malcolm X is in Omaha. He's one of Omaha's most famous Native sons. He might not be the most liked or the most revered by everyone, but he is no doubt one of the most famous. So there are no African American people in the Nebraska Hall of Fame. Black people in Omaha, in Nebraska, have done significant things. There are none. You don't even have to be from Nebraska to be in the Nebraska Hall of Fame. There are many Black people in Omaha, in Nebraska, who are from Nebraska, who have done many significant things, but there are none, let alone the most famous Black person from Nebraska.
Wow, that's so true.
So that's one reason it's important. This is his fourth attempt to get into the Hall. Well, this is the fourth attempt for someone to put him into the Hall of Fame. And it just seems a little ridiculous to me. I don't have the full history on how many times it's taken others to get in. I don't know. But I think 4 times is ridiculous. And originally, the argument the other 3 times was he's too controversial. He's too controversial. Wow. And they're not saying that this time. You have to kind of change up the talking points,
There are other controversial people who make national things. Obviously, we've had a former president who's controversial, for that matter. So controversy is, for someone's controversy, maybe another person's logic. So it's kind of interesting. And what does it? How do we define that term? And from what vantage point or reference point do we do that so that it's much more encompassing? I was going to I was go back into the content of your article. I know you gave kind of a narrative and so on. About the article and so on. Did you get any reactions from that article, by the way, from the community? Anybody call you up or talk to you about it, or rebuttals?
Actually, I've only written 2 columns for the World Herald just this year.
Oh, okay.
27 years I've been here. I've only written 2. My first one, which was on white privilege, got a lot more feedback. This one, I only received positive feedback. Actually.
Okay, good to hear that. Now, we were impressed with that and so on. And I guess one of the things I'm going to switch up to is it is strange that in the public schools and universities in Nebraska, there's little offered in the curriculum about the life and times of Malcolm X. I actually taught in Black Studies for a number of years and could not get a course in the curriculum where you got people where they were actually taking the course. They had it at one point. We had like 9 people registered and they needed 10. So it shows you the climate at the university of not accepting and promoting Malcolm X, but also in Nebraska or in our public school system. Please help me understand what I'm trying to go to a little bit here is Malcolm is known nationally, internationally, he's respected and so on. But why is that we have such a hard time in Nebraska, and particularly giving him the tributes and the kind of the accolades that he deserved, considering someone who's as famous as they are? And you just alluded to that earlier. So why is it so difficult people do this?
I think in Omaha, it's Nebraska is a red state, I guess.
Code word being conservative. Being conservative. Okay,
yes,
gotcha.
Yes. I'm assuming that's that's the reason. Other cities, other states have schools, streets, buildings, museums, other things named for Malcolm X. He wasn't even born there.
Right.
He might not have even lived there in these other places. Right. But they recognize him. They recognize his accomplishments, his words, what he stood for. So here in Omaha, we seem to have a little bit harder time than that. I don't think they get into Malcolm X's words, his speeches, his teachings. They just slap the moniker on it that he's too controversial. Wow. He promotes violence. He, by any means necessary. That's not even a bad thing. By any means necessary is it's just a thing.
Well,
not a bad thing.
The revolutionary American independence, was it Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." So there are other people who, for wherever causes of their independence, they obviously are involved in civil wars and issues to get their rights. And a good example is Ukraine and things like that. I want to switch up a little bit and ask you a little bit. Some would argue that if Malcolm was around based on his teaching, we would not have some of these challenges. And I know one of the things that he may raise is here we are going as African Americans or people of goodwill to an all-white committee to pay tribute to him. Again, is that somewhat contrary to what Malcolm would be about? If Malcolm was alive today, would he go to the Nebraska Hall of Fame and ask him to put his name on a mantle? And then is that kind of contradiction to his teachings, what I'm asking, Sheritha?
Um, Probably so. I believe absolutely not. Malcolm X would not have asked for anything from the Nebraska Hall of Fame under any circumstances. The honor is not so much the people, well, the people have to be dead, first of all, for 35 years. So they're not asking it of themselves.
Right.
It's what they taught, what they encompassed, that has sustained the test of time.
Gotcha.
35 years is one of the criteria for getting into the hall. You have to have been dead at least 35 years. And the purpose of that is whatever it was you're famous for, being saluted or honored for, that had to withstood the test of time. And clearly what Malcolm X was teaching, what he was preaching, that has, I mean, everything he was going through, we go through it now in
Even today,
2022.
65 years or more later,
Yes,
are still
words are
suffering.
timeless.
Right, what he was working on during his period and so on. The other thing is your editorial pointed out, and I really liked it, some contradiction of the J. Sterling Morton. You talked about that. You gave a kind of a narrative of them. Also, he was the author of Arbor Day. And why was your central beef with Morton, who has a school named after him in the city? You laid down some reasons why you kind of challenges why he's there and all that whole existence, but you really had some salient points that you raised there. So share with us a little bit more about that.
I did not bring my column with me, so I'm going to be paraphrasing. But basically, he wanted to make Nebraska a slave state. He wanted, Nebraska's in the middle of the United States. And of course, slavery was down south, creeping, inching forward as states would allow. And Morton, back in the day, when Nebraska was a territory, he helped create some of the first laws, and he wanted Nebraska to be a slave state. He did not see Negroes, which is the word I had to use in the paper. That was not his word. He did not see them he did not want them to be seen as people. He did not want them making political decisions at all. So, and he's in the Nebraska Hall of Fame. And he got there not because of what he thought or what he was teaching. They slid all that to the side. And, oh, he's the founder of Arbor Day. Oh, he was the Secretary of Agriculture. And he was wildly racist.
Right.
But they moved that to the side. They need to move things to the side for Malcolm X. Or really, they don't. Honestly, I thought what he was teaching was fine. And his thought process evolved over time. But the point he was making still stood. Black people in America, we have a hard time. And it is because of the systemic racism in America.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that. Well, the other thing related to that, we had a William Thomas on one of our shows about a year ago, and he talked about revisionist history. And he says, even though we're in today's time, things were wrong back then, they're wrong today, and we should challenge it. So, we got to be careful not to give people excuses and act like they shouldn't be challenged by the moralities of issues. He also said that people were fighting slavery. And so, again, it's one of those kind of things that we need to be sensitive to when we talk about all these issues, even today, with new eyes and new visions and so on. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is I know the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation location is one of the 70 tourist attraction spots for Nebraska in Nebraska. Do they do more from your vantage point than offer tourism at that center? Because based on the way you wrote the article, is one of those places, but people go there as a tourist spot. Is kind of promoted by the tourist industry in Nebraska or something?
Yes, they just got put on the Nebraska Passport, which is like a in-state tourism kind of program, helps promote the economy in the state. the Great Plains Black History Museum also was put on there as a stop. That was this year. The Malcolm X Foundation got put on last year as a tourism stop. But that center, they do more than tourism. They have education centers, they hold festivals, concerts. There's like a peace garden there. I want to say a visitor center, education center.
Well, one of the things that I'm always sensitive to is that you just alluded to is just got put on there and it should have been on there a long time ago.
Right.
But also we want, if they're there, we want them to get their credibility where people go and visit them versus kind of come in after the fact. Now,
Yes.
one of the things that hit me when I was reading the article, and I also looked at this, we look in terms of comparing Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. From your perspective, how can or should we compare those two icons in their history as African Americans, or should we? So give me a little bit more feedback on that.
Personally, I think they're two sides of the same coin, fighting the same cause, just a different approach.
So you saw them, you say you saw them the same, you saw them doing the same thing in a sense as civil rights workers?
Personally, yes, just a different approach.
Okay. Okay. And you didn't allude to Martin Luther King in your piece. Why not? Do you normally feel the need to not compare him, or do you always some people always do that when they write about Malcolm X, they oftentimes do, but you focus only on Malcolm X. Have you ever focused on Martin Luther King in some of your writings?
Well, no, as I said, this was only the second column I wrote for the World Herald, and this one was more timely because the vote for the Nebraska Hall of Fame is coming up on September the 12th.
Okay, got you.
So I wanted to make sure to get that done. But two points I wanted to make in that column were I didn't want to compare him to anyone because in all the past writings, at least in the World Herald, as I was doing my research, the word that stuck with him was controversial because as he was trying to get into the Hall of Fame, they nope, he's too controversial, can't get in, can't get in. So that was always stuck with him. And in my column, I wanted to make sure not to do that. Let's go ahead and stick that label on J. Sterling Morton.
Got you.
He's controversial. He's racist. He's still in.
Right, exactly. So we need to have a good kind of a barometer or a litmus test and look at some of these issues, what they've written and so what they said. And again, we need to have kind of an opportunity to challenge it in today's context. As we see violence and well, no, I'm gonna switch up. You in one of your previous editorial, you write about white privilege. That was the one you alluded to earlier. And many whites deny there is privilege despite the economic and social disparities between African Americans and white. Is it possible to have a conversation considering the hostile nation or the hostile environment when you raise these issues up in the racial climate in Nebraska? And I'm alluding to the Department of Education and that critical race theory. You see a lot of people are pushing back. So can we actually really have a genuine conversation about white privilege and have people to understand the concept and do something about it from your vantage point? Sheritha?
It seems like you can only have it with some people. You can't have that conversation with everyone. In writing that column,
you went silent, you got muted on me. Okay, now.
Were very supportive and understood the points I was trying to make and, backed my points and things like that. But in separate conversations, with one particular white person, he said, oh, I don't know about that. If you say white privilege, they're not going to listen, meaning the white people. They're not going to listen. White privilege is a hard edge word. So don't say that. I said, I'm gonna say it. Who cares if it's hard edge? We get hard edge things sent to us on the daily.
Right.
It's hard edge, so you can't take it. You automatically reject it because you don't like how it sounds. His choice was, he told me, don't say white privilege in your column. Say Black disadvantage. I said, I will never say that. I will never say that. Why do Black people have a disadvantage? Because of your privilege? then
Wow.
that's what we'll talk about.
Yeah, it's painful. I'm not, again, I want to be facetious or negative or just, but sometimes people's cranial capacity seems somewhat limited, as if there is not a cognitive process going on to understand the contradictions of privilege when you get free land or you get jobs. And I have white colleagues, they quit one job and they don't even have a job. Next day they got another one. And it goes easy because a lot of times they know each other. I know in Douglas County administration and City Hall, you see very few people of color there. And you also know a number of people who get their jobs because their friends brought them in or give them contracts. And the way the whole system operates is privilege. So if I'm not inside the door, I don't know what's inside that system. But for somebody to say that they don't see the privilege that people have, whether it be masculine privilege, whether it be race privilege, economic privilege, you name it, it's like they're gaslighting or they're somewhat deluding themselves or somewhat dealing with a false reality. But yeah, white privilege is how this country was built in 450 years of enslavement and Jim Crow. What is that all about? And what have you paid for that? Just like, we've had the things with Native Americans and Latinos and Asians, all the negativities they've caused. So again, not to get on the editorial soapbox, there's just some basic common sense things that people seem not to understand, that the sky is blue at times and sometimes cloudy, but yeah, it's that. There was another point that came out, and I was gonna ask you in terms of the article. When you wrote this article, are you gonna be doing a lot more of these kind of articles, or is this something you just did because of this one incident? Because you have two articles now. Are you gonna be doing a little bit more for the paper? You're on mute again. Okay.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, I said, are you going to do some more articles related to Malcolm X or other people of color, particularly African Americans, as you're in your role? Because it's kind of new, the fact you say you've done just two articles. Are you gonna do more of them, you think?
Hopefully so.
Okay, good. Now, one of the things that I'm really bothered by, and I say many people we've seen in the Royal Herald recently and elsewhere, the news media, there's been an uptick in violence. There's been stuff nationally as well as locally. We see this violence is affecting our community. What are the critical factors from your vantage point that we need to deal with violence to deal with some of those, even though obviously your article didn't allude to that, but it's something that we as African Americans oftentimes talk about. And people say, how do you deal with it internally versus externally when you use law enforcement or people outside of our system? How can we address some of the violence that's going on that seems obviously senseless and disjointed?
Well, I would have to say I'm not sure about that. I am raising two teenage boys. They're twins. They just started high school. And so, and they're good boys. They're nice, they're respectable, they are honor students and all that. And so, since they've been little, I've just been trying to teach them how to be in this world. I want them, we want our kids to be kids as long as they possibly can.
Right.
Any bad incident can have them growing up really quickly. You're somewhere and your friend gets murdered, you're going to grow up really quickly. You're somewhere and the police jam you up, you're going to grow up really quickly. So I wanted them to, like I said, be kids as much as possible, but I still have to teach them, you are Black in this world. You step out of this house, you are Black on your porch. Someone can call the police while you're on your porch. We've seen this. Right. You're on your porch or you're watering your lawn, but they don't think it's your lawn.
Are the neighbors water flower garden and you get arrested?
How does that happen in the United States? Watering the neighbors' flowers, and you get arrested for being nice, because that's just being nice. That's what you're doing.
Crazy.
So I've had to, teach them. Well, and this kind of gets off from your question, but it is the fear I have with my boys. I want them to always be safe. And I know I can't always keep them safe. So I try to incorporate things in them and hope that carries over and they make smart decisions. I've talked to them about driving. They're not even old enough to drive yet. I've probably been talking to them about driving since they were 10. They weren't old enough to drive, but right. I just want things to sink in. And even if they do all that, they do everything mom said and dad said, and we make all these right decisions, anything could still happen. Violence in our community, violence from the police, violence from some neighborhood watch person as you're walking home with your Skittles and your
Right.
Arizona ice, anything. So it's really just frightening. It's frightening. Raising young men. I have a daughter as well. I've also had to teach things, but we've seen so much happen to these young men that it's frightening. So I don't have an answer. I can just kind of tell you, I've tried to do things I can to alleviate things, but I know anything can still happen.
Well, as you share that, I'm kind of concerned because I know that even as raising three African American males in our family, one incident come to mind as it relates to what you just shared is police officer stopped my son because he was driving his brother's Mercedes SUV, and he thought he had stole it, even though there was obviously it was not a stolen vehicle, but just to harass him. And I found out about it later after the fact. I don't think my son got the officer's name and plate and so on and all that information, but just because you see a young person driving a late model vehicle doesn't necessarily stereotypically you should come back and say, oh, did you steal that?
Right.
I think that's one of the problems. The police department needs some serious racial and anti-racism training, and I see that they've had numerous issues with discrimination and
I agree with that.
degree. So we need to have those conversations, and you're not going to deal with it better unless you have the conversations from the very
Right.
people who've been impacted by it. So I really appreciate you sharing that. We're getting close to the end, but I wanted to, before we got to the final question and so on in terms of closing comments, when you were going through your educational system and even with your work experience and so on, are there other things that you've done in the community? Because I alluded to it earlier, that kind of helps promote this kind of healthy living or this healthy give back. So are there things that you've been involved in that you're extremely proud of in a sense?
Yes, my husband is a dentist, and he hasn't had them recently, but he used to have the free dental days
Oh, wow.
where the community would come, and we would we would attempt to provide, some entertainment, a little bit of entertainment, a little
Wait,
bit of
hold you long.
snacks.
This is for Friday service and entertainment while you're fixing my teeth. That's a new concept.
We'd give them offer donuts and orange juice. No one would eat because they were all like, "We're going to get our teeth done. We don't
Right,
want to go
right,
to donuts."
right.
And
That's funny.
but our thinking was it's early in the morning. You got to sit here for a while, but it would be an all day thing. Um, yes, like all day. Maybe we'd start about 8 in the morning and maybe get done about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And we
Wow.
try to see as many patients as we can. I'm not a dentist at all. I would just kind of be the MC sometimes, or make sure the line was flowing, or take people through the back to the bathrooms, or make sure everybody they would do cleanings and extractions,
Oh,
and
wow.
was it just cleanings and extractions?
And this is
It
in the
might have it
community.
was just cleaning and yes,
Oh,
it
wow.
was
I
at
didn't
my
even know that.
husband's dental office at Worthy Dental.
Okay, I did not know that. I really appreciate you sharing
Mhm.
because I know you've been involved in other activities. And I can tell from the tone of your writing that you are committed to the struggle and helping people out. So that we're getting down to the very end. I want to ask you, did you have any closing comments for our listening audience? Anything you want to share with the listening audience? Our real viewing audience, as we would say too.
Um, well, I'd like everybody to kind of pay attention to this Hall of Fame vote that's going to happen on September the 12th. Because I feel like I said in the column, to leave him out of the Hall of Fame still, because he's been left out. So to do it yet again really says a lot about us as a state.
Wow.
More than it does about this, one of our most famous native sons, one of the world's most famous national civil rights leaders. He's
Wow.
famous in the world, but for his work here in the United States. So I think that's very important. Let's see what else. I will be working on another column soon. I think it will be on, I guess I'm not sure yet what it'll be on, but I will be working on another one. I would say they like my voice here and want to hear more of it. Not everyone does, though. I have gotten, like I said, I got a little feedback from my first column about, how white privilege doesn't exist and things like that. So that's really about it.
Good. I really appreciate you sharing that. Sheritha Jones, I really appreciate you as a chief librarian at the Omaha World Herald, also to be able to speak about racial issues in a healthy way, because I know that in Omaha, some of us get in positions we can't have these conversations. I think this is why we need to deal with racial healing much more so as we start to see these great divisions and crazy conversations that don't necessarily bring people together with bridges. Obviously, we can disagree, but again, we need to be able to connect on the commonality that makes us a better society, a better community, a better city. So really appreciate you being with us today, and we look forward to maybe having you come back and join us again. So thank you very
Thank
much.
you for having me. I appreciate it.
Good. Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed this edition of Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. We will continue to bring community people who have different points of views and ideas and issues that can help make our city, our state, our country a much better place by engaging in a decent dialogue that raises to the top and help us to challenge some of the paradigms that we face. So we look forward to you joining us again. Barocco.